20th District Republican guru, Senator Bill Stanley. By the way, yesterday was his birthday. Senator, happy birthday.
Thank you, John. Good morning to you.
Good to have you with us. Good to have you with us.
Good
Now, I know you're probably going to run for governor. That's what I think, and I'm never wrong about these things. But let's put that aside a minute. Let's go to Virginia's 200-something million surplus. You know, to a lot of people on the outside, it looks like, oh, the sky is falling. The sky is falling. We're not going to have any money, blah, blah, blah. So now we have a 200 million, some odd million surplus. And I had one state senator on my show, friend of yours, Tom Garrett, a week ago. And Tom says, hey, let's send everybody a check back. What say you?
That's not a bad idea. Actually, the surplus is nearly $500 million from what I've been told. And it certainly came about two reasons. One, I think we in our finance offices, there were some miscalculations of revenues, which looked like we were going to have a large dip in revenues to the tune of over $1 billion. If you remember back in the day, we had a kind of a stalemate over Medicaid expansion, and we weren't passing a budget. When we got control of the Senate with the election of Ben Chafin and the retirement of Phil Puckett, what we couldn't get done in 6 months because of the stalemate, we were able to do in 6 hours. And what we also did was put some fail-safe measures and some cuts in there to make sure that we had, a cushion. Well, that cushion, the projections turned out to be not so correct either. It wasn't as bad as it was supposed to be. And with those cuts, that returned a large surplus to the state. I would love to give it back to the taxpayer. I think we should. What we have in place, well before I made it to the Senate, are things that make us put that money somewhere. So most of that money goes to the rainy day fund, or to schools, or to other issues that we have, payment of bonds that we may have outstanding. So a lot of that money, almost all of it, is accounted for and limited in what we can do with it. So because of those measures, we can't give it back to the taxpayer. But we should then be thinking, when we go back in January, of how understanding a little bit better how we're generating revenues, that we should be looking at tax cuts, especially in an economic time like this, when so many people are struggling to make ends meet, to put food on the table for their children and their family. This is the time where the state gives back to the people that have given so much to the state.
No question about it. I mean, a lot of people feel they got sold a bill of goods. And look, I'm not one to say, Democrat or Republican, but it seems like every time there's a Democratic gubernatorial administration in Virginia, the sky is falling. They have to find there's no money. Then they get the money. Then there's a surplus. Then the money goes. I mean, it seems to be a ploy. Now, I'm sure it isn't that way, and I'm sure that everything was not done that way, but it certainly seems that way to the outside world.
Yeah, and I can understand that. But we all looked at the numbers the same way in the projections. Remember, we're always looking and forecasting outwardly, that is, into the future to see what those revenues will be. We don't have a firm grip on whether incomes are going to go up, generating revenue, taxation, collections. Those things we have to predict, and so some of the models we use to predict showed that the state was looking at a shortfall. So, I don't know if partisan politics, it always plays a little bit in it. But we were all looking at the same numbers. We all were concerned that we weren't going to meet our obligations. And it all falls into where I think Virginia works the best, which our federal government should do better. We go in there with the mindset that we must balance our budget. It's a requirement. So these kind of things and the actions that we take are all based around one thing, that we're going to pay our debts, we're not going to incur new debts, and we're going to be fiscally responsible with the taxpayer money. So I think all of that kind of play together, and people on the outside can say, well, you're just generating more revenue, and you're saying the sky is falling so you can have more money. We're trying to make sure that our checkbook balance is just like people at home are doing. So that's, I think, really was the driver of why we saw what we saw. But again, what you saw was Walter Josh, Chris Jones, the leaders of finance in both the House and Senate, really putting the nose to the grindstone, really taking responsibility to make sure it balanced. And what we did was, they weren't draconian cuts, but there were some cuts that we made that were enough to make sure that this surplus could be possible. We didn't anticipate it to the degree that it occurred, but certainly that's what Republicans do best, is we make sure that checkbook balances. We are on the conservative side of spending, and that's what resulted in what is really a windfall for the state at this time, and I wish we could give it right back to the taxpayer. That would be the first thing I think we'd all do.
Remember this big debate over Medicaid expansion? I mean, went on, the government was going to get shut down, the whole bit. One of the core arguments that you guys had is, look, whatever the projections are, it's going to be triple that. People are going to move in that are 50 miles outside the area and surrounding states that don't have it. There's going to be a bunch of people that are just on the edge of the income. They're going to cut their hours back so they qualify. Now we're finding out there's a number of states that have gone with Medicaid expansion that it's now going to bust their budget because it's 10, 15 times over what they estimated, Kentucky being one. Then when the federal subsidies get cut back, they can't fund it.
Right.
Were you guys vindicated by this news?
Well, certainly you can call it vindication, but I think, again, it just shows Republican prudence when it comes to these issues. We're very in tune with our budget, and we know that the costs will rise. Just a little history lesson in Virginia. We accept Medicaid, of course, and it's a federally funded program, at least partially funded, and administered by the states. Certain states, like Kentucky, get 90% of that funding from the federal government. They pay 10%. Virginia, because of our income levels in Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia, we are a 50-50 state. That means we split the cost of Medicaid 50-50. 50 paid by the local or state revenues, 50% by federal match. What we have right now is a program which is 21 cents out of every dollar that we generate in revenue already goes to the existing Medicaid program before expansion, before they talk about expansion. We're talking about right now a program, as it stands right now, that rises in cost by 8% per year. That means every 3 years, we're adding another billion with a B, to that program without expansion. Expansion in and of itself would have made that program even larger than our education programs, secondary school, high school, K through 12, and the like. We're talking right now about a program which you know the federal government cannot continue to fund at those levels. They say, well, we'll pull it back by 2017 to 10% contribution. That alone, if we were to accept expansion, would be over $200 million annually on top of the 8% growth. You add more people to the rolls, that 8% growth probably turns into 9 or 10% growth annually with expansion, and it's going to bust the budget. So we knew that ahead of time. Of course, the Democrats' argument was simply this, oh, no, this will create more jobs and do more for the economy, pump more money into the economy. Well, it would have helped our health care systems, which had made a deal under the ACA, the Obamacare Affordable Care Act, which is what we don't talk about, which is that almost $1 trillion, a half a trillion dollars, $600 billion, is being removed from the program that pays for senior care. That is money that's already been paid by our seniors for their care in the Medicare program. And so that loss of funds was affecting our hospitals, the rural hospitals, and the for-profits and not-for-profits. So they made the deal because they thought, well, we'll get Medicaid expansion. They'll make more money. They'll make up the difference. Well, then the Supreme Court said, well, it's a voluntary program, so it has to be administered voluntarily. You can't force the states to do it. Well, therein lies the problem. The hospitals lost money. They didn't get to go back on their deal with Obama when they're still losing that the Medicare money that's going to seniors. They're not making up the difference, but the difference is made up by the taxpayer here in Virginia if we were to expand. So, yes, we've thought about this prudently. We'd love to be able to cover everybody, but it's just not a program we can afford unless you're willing to cut public education drastically, our highway programs drastically, and our public safety programs drastically. And when you ask the average Virginian, they're going to say no. Those programs are essential core functions of government, and we need to keep them. So there has to be other alternatives that we need to look at in reforming health care, making sure that quality care is there for them, because even in the Medicaid system as it exists, it's a flawed system. You know, think about it this way, John. Over 50% of all doctors in Virginia do not accept Medicaid. Of those that do, nearly 60% of those that do are not accepting new patients. So even if expansion were to occur, the people that would then be put on the rolls aren't getting quality health care because you've really shrunk the number of doctors that will take them. So it's a quandary. I think we acted properly and prudently. And you're going to see, California, 300% increase in enrollment. And when you look at the ACA, the majority of the ACA enrollees is not in the gold, bronze, or silver plans of Obamacare. it's mostly Medicaid.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be busting a lot of budgets. There's no pennies from heaven. Now, the money simply isn't there. We're going to have to figure out a better way. I got 2 minutes. I'm with State Senator from the South Side, William Stanley, Republican 20th District. State Senator, the other day on Thursday last week, House Republican leaders called for an investigation into Virginia Planned Parenthood chapters. This in the wake of allegations that Planned Parenthood abortion doctors conducted partial birth abortions in order to harvest the body parts of children for money, if you will. How do you think that this is going to play out in Virginia?
Well, I think first, in watching those two videos now that have come out, what Planned Parenthood is doing in selling human beings' body parts, babies' body parts, is an abomination. And quite frankly, we should not be funding them. Not a dollar of taxpayer money should go to a program that thinks in the ways that Planned Parenthood does, especially when they think about how to crush a baby in a way not to harm organs that they can then harvest and profit by. I mean, that's a horror movie, and so I think the calls for an investigation are warranted. I am stunned by the silence of the Democrats that are sitting on the sidelines and not commenting right now. And I can only think that the reason why they're quiet is because any response is not a good response for them. So I think it's absolutely imperative we move forward with investigations. This is a very serious issue. Roe v. Wade is the law of the land, but quite frankly, this is just horrific, and something like this should not be funded by taxpayer money.
Absolutely. Senator William Stanley, Republican 20th District, Southside, Virginia. We're out of time. We want to thank the state senator for being with us. Want more information? John. You can email him at district20 at senate.virginia.gov.